Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us.
One of the tools common to those who sexually abuse kids is grooming. It's manipulative behavior that abusers use to gain access to potential victim. They coerce them to agree to the abuse, reduce the risk of being caught. And while these tactics are most often used against younger kids, teens and vulnerable adults are also at risk. And so we are talking about grooming. We have a panel tonight, and of course we have Kevin, and then we have our friend Mike and our friend Daniel. And so we are just going to weigh in on this topic and see where it goes. Kevin, do you want to start?
So for most of my life, I didn't realize I was groomed until I basically started looking back at what I've been through. And I realized the abuse that occurred when I was older. I was around 11 at that time. I had an older friend at junior high school who groomed me for abuse, but it was for his older sister. And he basically just took an interest in, I think he knew I was a loner and I didn't have a lot of friends. And he took an interest in the art I was doing and the stuff I was doing at school. He was in a couple of my classes. And then he just kind of coerced his way into my life. And then he talked me into coming home with him one time. And it was in order to look at his dad's magazines. And at that time, I knew about pornography because of my older brothers and their stuff, but I still I didn't have a lot of experience with it. So I was very curious. So he talked me into coming home with him to look at these movies that he had. And at that time, these were Super 8 movies on we didn't have videotapes or anything. But what he did was he talked me into basically being abused by his older sister. And he was filming me at that time. And I still don't remember what happened after a certain point, and I still have blockage, and I don't know why. Even after all these years, I get to a certain point and then I blank. But yeah, I mean, he groomed me by becoming a friend and accepting me and just making me feel like I mattered to him. And then he knew I was interested in some of the girls at school and stuff, and then he talked me into coming home to see these movies, and that was what happened. And then after that, I basically stayed away from him from then on because I was so traumatized.
That brings up a good point, Kevin, because we think of somebody who's grooming us as the actual abuser, but also kids can lure kids. And I don't think we talk about that enough.
Yeah, he wasn't the abuser, but he was in a way because he had a camera and he was filming at the time. And so they were both abusing.
Yeah, with the Jeffrey Epstein case, it was often they would train the teenage girls to lure and recruit other girls for the whole trafficking ring.
Yeah.
So, yes, sometimes they will train peers.
They would use a lure.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's what happened to me. And of course they do, because it's a lot more attractive to have someone that's either your peer or someone that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Daniel, do you want to weigh in on this?
Oh, I was just thinking how grooming is the establishment of trust. And you're more likely to trust somebody that you want to be friends with, somebody that's your age. So I didn't personally have people my age playing a part in that. But I introduced one of my friends to the last man that abused me, and he ended up being abused by him too. But I didn't introduce him with the intention of that happening. But I can see how it's just a small step for somebody to even do that, to go that far, So, but it's the establishment of trust.
Yeah. It is. And I think because as survivors, I think abusers look for those who are looking for just something that they don't have, as far as, a relationship. They don't have a older brother, a father figure in their life, or a, mother figure in their life, something they're lacking. They look for that lacking, and they know how to take advantage of that. And they know what they're doing. They're very aware of how to get what they want and the ways to do it. And I think grooming is one of the hardest things for someone who is a survivor to admit that happened to them, because you feel like you've been duped. You feel like you've been used by someone you thought you could trust.
Right. And we become marks, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That they're so adept at what they do. They can point out, like, a wolf trying to get the weakest sheep, or the lion getting the weakest impala to attack. They will see, oh, that's the one. Okay. And they can just do these inklings of temptations just to lure them in. And just like a fisherman with the bait, you just kind of wiggle that worm out there until someone catches it, and then you get it. For me, as a 20-year-old with the Methodist minister, I was totally looking for that father figure, and I think he figured that out. And as soon as I showed interest, he was all on that. And that he liked teenage boys, and I fit that profile. Even though I was 20, I looked 16, but then I was legal, so I was even more enticing. So you would be, I'm assuming, less chance of getting into trouble because I was legal, and I had my own apartment, and I lived alone. So all those different things. So it's like I wanted to share with him missions conference I was going to, and he's, oh, I would love to hear more. So do you want me to set up a time in your office? Well, why don't I come to you and come to your apartment? And one thing led to another, and and sometimes just because of the position that they're in, pastor or coach or anyone in any kind of leadership that's automatically looked up to, and celebrities, they get that as well, and they can use their power, or Hollywood producers or whatever, that they can use the power of the position. So it's even less effort, because just by who they are, they're already that much more easy to reach out to people and to lure people in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, there's kind of two sides to this coin, that, like Julie mentioned in her interview, that she was set up to get trafficked and pursued because of her childhood. Now, we do know that there are a lot of people that get abused that come from fine homes, and the abuser is clever or coercive enough to still get that child. But when you are set up by being neglected at home, you think of the playground scenario. The abuser sits outside the playground and he watches, and he can, like Mike was saying, like sorting out the sheep. Oh, that kid's alone. He's a loner. Nobody's going to notice. Nobody's going to care. And it's so sad. But when people, if it takes 26 years on average for a person to tell their story, now they're adult and they're telling their story, but it's hard to be in that child mindset that you were coerced. There's this adult that's like, I should have known. And so then that's where the shame and the different things come in. When you were just a kid, there was no way. And as you said, Mike, they were an authority, so to speak.
Yeah. Also, when it comes to, like Julie was saying, she felt set up by her childhood, but also she was naive because of her childhood. I think she didn't realize what a real relationship would look like. And I think that's something that a lot of survivors struggle with, is we don't recognize a normal relationship with either a spouse or friendship. We don't recognize what that looks like. So we're susceptible to being used by someone who's not, wanting a normal relationship, but wanting that that manipulation, wanting to manipulate us into something that we're not willing to do unless they can coerce us into it. And I think what's hard about grooming is it's hard to spot when it's happening, because you're just feeling like either you're being flattered, or you're feeling like this is a good thing. You're feeling like this is something that you've always wanted. It generally starts out in a way that you feel good about it, and you don't feel like there's anything wrong until it turns. And by that time, it's too late. And you're trapped. And like in Julie's case, he knew exactly how to trap her in that relationship by basically blackmailing her with the abuse that he inflicted on her. And so it's hard to really spot the difference between grooming and someone who does actually care about you, who does actually want to, have a good relationship and be a good person to you. So that's where the difficulty is how do you spot it? Well, it's really hard for anyone to spot it. But, the I'm on watch, the modules, they talk about what to look for. And I think some of the key things are, when someone who is a lot older takes an interest in you, that's a little too much interest, or when someone's showering you with gifts or flattery that seems a little excessive, when something just seems a little out of the ordinary. But I think that's what's wrong, or that's what's hard for survivors, is we don't know ordinary.
Yeah. Well, and also, if you're the child, there's no way you can discern that, because you're a child and parents are supposed to be watching out. And I mean, how many of us have heard stories where there's a neighbor man that's giving your little girl or your little boy all these presents, and you're just thinking, oh, isn't that nice? And not even a clue that something's not right. And I think if we bring awareness to this, talk about it, that people could pay attention. And the one thing that I love what they said on Watch, they said, we'd rather get 100 calls to the trafficking line of people that are not being trafficked than miss one that is. And so if we make people aware, if parents can know what to look for, better for them to call someone out and be wrong than not call them out and let that go right on under their nose.
For me, also looking back, I believe my mother was groomed by my father to even have children and then dupe her into giving him access to us as children, that she didn't even want kids. And somehow he convinced her otherwise, to not only have kids, but then arrange access. And they had 2 girls, and then I was on the way. They were breastfed. He convinced her to not breastfeed me, so then he could volunteer her bottle feedings, so he would have even more access to me. So all of that grooming happened with her, so she would give access to me. So that's how insipid that is.
Yeah, that's true, Mike. And I think that's a point people don't really think about a whole lot. Grooming is not just of the target, it's also of the people that stand in the way between the abuser and the target. So, many of those who abused me were known and trusted members of the families. They had my mother's confidence. And we could fault my mother and say, especially with the last man that abused me, that was less of a thing. She didn't really have much of a relation with him, but he was friendly. He was known in the neighborhood. So she really came from a generation where people didn't really distrust one another like that. And so I don't blame my mom for it at all. I think she was also a victim of grooming herself. And so to get to me, you had to get past her, and she was a loving mother. Like, she would never have let something just happen to me. But the fact of the matter is, those who harmed me got through her. They put her defenses down, and then they were able to get to me. And a lot of people don't think about that. There's more than one victim, so to speak. And so I think it's kind of hard for us too, as survivors, that we're not necessarily that merciful on ourselves when we look back. It's hard to accept that we were great. It's hard to even accept that it was abuse. It's like, well, I thought I wanted it. No, Daniel, what you wanted was relationship. And abuse is a corruption of the relationship. And the corruption didn't happen on my end. The corruption happened on the abuser's end towards me. So it's hard to unpack that as an adult because you're still thinking as a child. And so you're trying to parent yourself through this because you weren't parented when you were young. And it's hard to be a parent to yourself because you were never meant to parent yourself. You were meant to be parented. So as survivors, we have to give ourselves some grace and recognize when we come to terms with, yes, we were groomed, we have to give ourselves the grace to accept that and not feel the shame, because the shame isn't on our end. The shame is on the person who corrupted the relationship.
Right.
That is so good.
Yeah. Oh, also in the Leaving Neverland documentary, the victims of Michael Jackson mentioned that it was the families who were groomed. So their parents, he would convince the parents that he was safe and lavish things on the parents as well to convince them that it was okay for him to spend all this time with their sons. And so, yeah, the families were groomed, very much so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, when we think about, I loved what you said, Daniel, about, when you look back, they are master manipulators. Like if an adult can't figure it out, a child certainly couldn't. And just one thing I want to say, Mike, to you about Michael Jackson is I work in the music industry, and it's so hard because there are people that still idolize him and don't want to believe those things. I absolutely will never introduce his song. I cannot not play his music, but I can always never say his name. And that's my commitment to anybody that's been abused. And, I'm not going to say it out loud, but my commitment is that I will not say his name or highlight in any way his music, because when you have these huge icons that get away with this kind of thing, it's just re-victimizing the victim all over again.
Yes, I've similarly talked to radio stations and so forth and said, no, whenever I hear that particular artist, I turn off your station. Mm-hmm. So you might consider or reconsider your playlist.
Yeah, but they won't.
No,
they won't, because it's money, And I think what is really hard is that the confusion and the messages are so confusing. And as Daniel said, the corruption happens on the other end. We're innocent people looking for relationship, looking for love, looking for someone that cares about us. And so easily you can manipulate a child because they don't know. And it's, it is so sad. And I know even with Julie, how she mentioned that once she recognized with her dad, even, it's so hard because this is a person. It's not a stranger. It's your dad. Now what? He's supposed to love you. So how are you supposed to navigate life now, knowing what you know? It's that reparenting. It's like you have to relearn what it's supposed to be like. And so the confusion, I think, is exhausting.
What really struck me about her story was that her perpetrator was a nice guy and looking out for her and protecting her from the supposed bad guy. And then he turned the table on her. And I think I really like what you said, Daniel, about how often it's not just the survivor that's groomed, but it's also the parents, whoever's the caregiver is groomed to trust that person. And because of that, it makes it so much harder to come forward for the survivor, because that person is now a friend or, a relation, someone that your parents or whoever's your caregiver trusts them and cares about them. And there's like a relationship there. So now you're stuck with this burden of, right, well, they did this wrong thing. Do I have to tell my caregiver about it and wreck this relationship they have? So they're really incredibly manipulative, and that's what I really am struck with is they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing is wrong, and they are very aware of it, but they also know how to get away with it because they have to know how to get away with it. And so that's why it's so hard to come forward, because they know how to keep us silent.
Yeah. And once you do come forward, it's not just, yay, I came forward. Now you've got this long journey of recovery. And Daniel, that's the one thing I remember about your story. And you can go back and listen to our interview with Daniel Eichelberger. And that once you get on the other side, you're just beginning, and it's not a victory dance. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, where to even start with that? It is not, when the realization first hit me, it wasn't really that freeing in a sense at all. It was complete. I mean, a lot of things started making sense to me, and that way some understanding came to me, but it was completely devastating. And it was like, I mean, it's been several years now, and I'm still slogging through some of this stuff and learning to be gracious to the child that I was and allowing myself to be innocent. That is almost impossible in a human sense, because I carried the weight of this thing for decades. And it's hard, even with the knowledge, it's hard to get rid of the feelings. They are wrapped around you. They're actually enmeshed in the fiber of your being. And it's hard to tease those things out. It takes a while. But learning to allow yourself to be the innocent party in the situation, it's so counter to what you've always believed. You have to tell yourself the truth. And I think I said this in my interview with you, Lori and Kevin, that you have to tell yourself the truth over and over and over again till you start to believe it, because you don't undo decades of wrong thinking in an instant, especially when your emotions and your sexuality were all wound up into this relationship and you believe the lie that was foisted on you. It takes a while. It's not a walk in the park, but over time, the freedom starts to come and the resolution starts to come to you, and you are able to understand things a little better. But it's work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, that's the thing that I harp on all the time, is that we have to do the daily work, because it will sneak up on us so quickly. And, our mind can change our brain. But like you said, we're basically brainwashed to believe this. And it's one thing, maybe if you're an adult and you get in some sort of situation and you believe it, it's maybe a short period of time. But when you're believing these things from a child until your adulthood, it's going to take a while and a lot of self-talk. And the good news is we can change it. The hard news is it is work. And I work with people in recovery from drugs and alcohol, and it's a daily struggle. And if they don't connect daily, they get in trouble. And I feel like it's the same for anybody in any kind of recovery as a survivor, because, you don't want that stronghold of the bad message to seep back in when you're working so hard to change those pathways and think the thoughts that we were intended to think before that person changed everything. And something, Daniel, you spurred us to do another show on what we're going to call the abuser. And I'll tell you what, it's been so hard, because I hear it all the time now. And even with the one we did last time, my trafficker, my abuser. And that gives so much power. And even changing those words can start to give you a separation. So I'm so glad that you brought that to our attention.
It's not easy, Lori. I about slipped up earlier when I was talking and said my abuser again. But I caught myself, right? So it is so hard, but you're right. You start to make that distance. And as you're totally myopic when you're looking at this thing, when you're that close to it. As you build the separation, things come into focus much quicker.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, one thing, adding on to what you were saying, Lori, whenever I work with survivors or whenever I tell my story, that I make sure to add that it was not your fault. And say those words. And in the male survivor community, too, those words are said very often, that we need to emphasize it, because it's so hard for survivors to hear it that they need to hear it again and again and again to let it really sink in that that is the truth. It was not our fault. It was not my fault. It was not your fault. And yes.
I think that's what grooming does to us often, is because we want it. We want that relationship, whatever it started as, whatever the person who groomed us did for us. We wanted it, and it was attractive to us, and we enjoyed it to that point. So we feel this. I know for me, I think I have that repressed memory, and it's still repressed so far, but I think it was because of the shock of what happened, because I thought I had this one relationship that was good, I was looking for, that I really enjoyed for a time, and then the shock of what happened just threw me. I think that's what's so hard for survivors to not feel blame about, because we wanted it at first. We wanted that relationship. Whatever they offered was something that we wanted or needed or was looking for, but they knew that, and that's what they used against us. And that's what we have to remember. It's not our fault, because they knew how to manipulate us.
Yes, those were legitimate needs that we had, that whether we're looking for the father figure or whatever, those longings that we have, those are normal and natural. Mm-hmm. And they twisted that and used that to their advantage to lure us in.
Right.
Yeah.
And whether you get away or they dismiss you, it's first of all, it's the betrayal. But then there's so much, again, that confusion of what they're done with me. They don't want me, when you get a certain age or whatever. And then you feel bad for feeling bad about that. It's like that compounding circular thing that, again, saying to yourself, it's not your fault.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, when you realize this, it goes against everything you felt towards the person, because it makes them look more monstrous than they've ever looked before to you. And grooming actually sets them up as a friend.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so when you start to realize, wait a second, I'm the innocent person in this relationship. This person corrupted it. This person did this, and I'm actually innocent. That makes them look criminal. And they are criminal.
And they are.
But they've never been criminal sometimes in your mind until you start to realize that, because grooming teaches you to feel towards them compassion. And I think in my interview with you, I talked about the last man who abused me. I wanted to defend him when I was called in, and questioned by the authorities about what he did to me. I didn't want to tell them. He was my friend. He was absolutely my worst enemy. Okay. But he was my friend to me. And that makes you uncomfortable as an adult when you start untangling all these emotions and you're like, he wasn't my friend. I wasn't loved. That's devastating. It's completely devastating. And it's like, well, who is this person? It's not the person I thought they were. But you wrestle with that because you still have a lot of self-blame, because you think you're a co-equal partner in this relationship, no matter the age difference. You think you're co-equal partners here. No, you're not. No. That's why, sweetie, the law protects you as a child, because you're innocent. You cannot possibly consent. So the world recognizes this. And sometimes Christians get it wrong in their brains that abusers aren't as bad as they are. They should be forgiven, and all the stuff that's irrelevant to the truth that they are criminal. They're criminal, and they're monstrous in your mind. And it's hard to start dealing with that in your 40s.
It is. And the Bible clearly says, if you take advantage of an innocent, they should tie a rope around your neck with it, because it is so criminal. I mean, it's one thing to coerce and to manipulate. That's bad. But to do it to a child. Yeah, there's no words for it, because when you think about it, look at all the years now, you're trying to undo all of these things. Not only did they take your innocence, they took all these years of you trying to undo all the things that they did, because it doesn't happen overnight. And again, the good news is once you share your story, you tell your secret, you can get help and you start that journey. And on the other side of fear, because like you mentioned, Daniel, you think they're your friend and you're afraid, you don't want to tell on them. But on the other side of fear is the freedom. But with that comes a lot of hard work.
Yeah. And loss and grief. I mean, if you really felt for that person, there's loss and grief when you realize that you've been abused by them.
And betrayal.
I think also when they groomed whoever was taking care of you, your parents or whoever was a caregiver, then when you come forward with it, they might not want to believe it. They might deny you. They might accuse you of lying. They might, because of how well they've been groomed, they might blame you. And so it becomes even harder because now not only are you trying to get help, but you're being denied that help by the person that should be taking care of you.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason that it's 26 years for people to tell, I think maybe people try to tell and they're not believed. Mm-hmm. And I mean, in my years of doing this work, I can't tell you how many people. In fact, I remember one time this gal came to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I've remembered our, family friend abused me and I've got to tell my mom." And I'm thinking, they're not going to believe you. She went to her mom believed her, was furious, called the family. I mean, all of this. And this friend of mine, yeah, she still had the work to do, but being believed goes a really long way.
Yeah. So when they groom whoever's taking care of you in order to get their trust, in order to take advantage of you, then you're totally screwed because they're not going to believe you that they could possibly do this to you. Mm-hmm. So I think the modules for I Am on Watch were really important because it helps you to spot a lot of the techniques that these perpetrators use in order to groom you, and also to spot if someone else is being groomed.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it makes us aware not only for sex trafficking, but also they want everyone who works at the grocery store, everyone who works at any retail store to take the training, because somebody's in there with a little kid buying them all kinds of presents and something seems off. Maybe that might stop something.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, we're more aware today, but we still have a long ways to go. When we were in our situations, there was just nobody knew anything. Nobody probably would have guessed anything. But the more aware, the more we can be able to spot it and help. And I know for me, one of the problems I've had is I spotted something when my kids were little, one of their friends. And the first thing I wanted to do was deny it because I thought, oh, I'm overreacting because it happened to me. And come to find out later, that child was being abused by the stepdad. But in my heart, I was like, I don't like this. And then I'm like, yeah, now I think everybody's being abused, right? I went too far the other way.
Yeah. And that abuse is the gift that keeps on giving, right? So this is a problem, right? Because the grooming, now that you're as an adult, you're dealing with it and you're wising up to it. Then, I feel like myself with my own children, I have 4 boys, I am hyper aware of their relationships with adults. Like, I'm hyper aware, and you can kind of feel like maybe you're being a little too over the top. But you know what? In some ways, if somebody had been hyper aware for me, I probably would have been spared a lot of what happened to me. So
better that than not know it.
Yeah. But you're right, Lori. You doubt yourself. It's self-doubt. You're still in this cycle that abuse has left you with this legacy, and you're like, okay, it's self-doubt. Self-doubt is what you're dealing with when you're dealing with recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what they really emphasize in the I'm on Watch, and I think it's important for any parent, any teacher, anyone who's a caregiver or in position of taking care of children, is if something feels off, it's worth it to pay attention. And if it really feels off, it's worth it to talk to the authorities. They have a phone number for the sex trafficking, and make that call. Call the authorities, talk to someone. The worst thing that can happen is if you don't do that. Mm-hmm. The worst thing is if you don't. If you do it and it's not an issue, then, what do you lose? You're looked at as someone who's hyper scared or whatever, but still you're looking out for that child, that person. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing you could do is just look the other way.
Yeah. And, along with that, I want to say it's easy for people to, if they think they see something, to want to confront the situation. And really the best thing to do is to call the authorities, because if you confront an abuser, if they're so manipulative, they'll find a way to go deeper, to hide better. And sometimes you see people that are in domestic violence situations and their family, they go and confront the abuser. Guess what? That woman or man ends up dead. It's like, we may think we're all that and we know what's going on, but direct contact, direct confrontation is rarely the best thing to do. And I just want to point that out, because these people are masterful. We weren't dumb little kids that got duped. These people are masterful. They know what they're doing. They know how to manipulate. They're masters at it. And so if you think you see something, call the authorities, maybe take the parent aside, but don't confront the person, because that's not going to be helpful. That's just going to give them a clue that someone's onto them.
Yeah. That, and also put their victim in danger, because they might
at risk
take it out on the victim, because the victim has exposed them. So you're putting the victim at greater risk by confronting the perpetrator.
Right.
So the best thing to do is to contact the authorities, whether it's the police or a hotline, someone who can help you find out if this is a situation that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah. And it is scary. It's scary to say something, or even in my years working I'm a mandated reporter for CPS, and it's hard to make those phone calls. And I've had to make them. And sometimes the people on the other end aren't even nice. They're like, well, who do you think you are judging this family? It's like, hey, I have to call when I see this. But those are hard calls. But when you I think about like what Daniel said about how working on undoing this and the feelings and everything, it's like you're having these strong feelings for these few minutes while you're trying to make a decision. Think about the feelings and everything that kid is going through and going to have to go through. If you're struggling in that moment, it's 100 times, 1,000,000 times worse for that child. So be wrong, but do something.
Yeah. Take the risk to rescue someone, because you might be wrong, but if you're right, you can rescue not only them, but other victims that they might take advantage of.
And that's the other thing I think that I've seen a theme of. A lot of times people don't recognize, because they're kids, that there's other people being abused. And then as adults, they don't want to report because they're like, well, it was just me. But so often it wasn't just you. And often we see in families, because they think, oh, it was just me, they will actually let that person babysit their own children. We've seen it, because they think, oh, it was just me. And so it's changing that mindset to realize people that are abusers and perpetrators are that way, probably most likely to lots of people, not just you. And I think when we can shift that mindset, but it's that specialness, right? They've told you you're so special. They've groomed you to believe that, so that you would never think there's more, because if you thought there was more, you'd probably do something about it.
When you report, sometimes when you report to an authority, you may not be believed, especially if it's a female perpetrator or a male victim. It's like, that never happens. And so it may take reporting to more than one person to be heard and be believed. Unfortunately, it's very true.
So before we leave, I feel like it's so important. And I think we said a lot of words about feelings. And, I want people who are listening to go, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I've had all those feelings. I felt confused. I felt betrayed. I felt so. But the thing I want to wrap up with is, what is it that you would want somebody who's recognizing this in their life? What is it you would want them to know that would encourage them to take their next step or get help?
Well, I think, like I said before, it was not your fault. That grooming is so insidious that they even make you believe that it's not even abuse. And it may take years to even realize that, yes, it was indeed abuse. And know that, yeah, any kind of need you expressed, those were normal, healthy needs. And they will twist that. And the same thing if, especially for boys, if you have a physiological reaction, the perp will use that as part of the grooming. It's like, oh, see, your body reacts. That means you like it or you're asking for it, and convincing them that they're part of it. But that's all part of the grooming process. So know that it was not your fault.
So good, Mike.
Amen to that. Yes, it was not your fault. There was something you needed, and they saw that, but
and exploited it.
Yeah, they warped that. They warped that to their desire. And so you were the victim of someone who saw your needs, and they weren't taking care of you. That's important to realize. They were not taking care of you. They were destroying your trust. So yes, it was not your fault. You did not deserve it. No matter what your needs were, whatever it was you were desiring, you didn't deserve what they gave you.
Yeah. And when you think about how easy it is to lure a little kid with something shiny or whatever, it's not their fault. They're kids.
So true.
What would you say, Daniel, that you want people to know?
Well, I want them to know that where they are in their journey and understanding and dealing with the grief and the fallout is okay. There's not a linear time scale that one follows in the recovery process. And where you are is okay. And you may have heard some things on the podcast today that sparked your brain to start thinking, and some things might be a little too hard to think about. It's okay. And you will be okay as you work through it. So be patient with yourself. One of the songs from my childhood has resurfaced in recent months, and it's been my mantra. And Journey, the group Journey, sang a song in the 80s called Be Good to Yourself. And I have listened to that song over and over and over again, because what we need the most is kindness to ourselves. We've not been kind to ourselves. So be patient. Be kind to yourself when you think about your childhood, what you should have done, what you could have done, what you didn't do, what they did. Be kind to the child that you were, and be patient. Listen, you've gone through this for decades. You are owed a little bit of kindness and a whole lot of patience. So give it to yourself.
I love that.
I love that. Yes.
That's
Thank
really
you,
good.
Daniel.
And I would just say, if you haven't told your story, tell your story, find somebody safe, because when you are able to start talking about it, and the best thing is if you get a counselor or a coach and you start doing that self-talk of, well, I should have known, and they nip that right in the bud and say, you were a kid, you couldn't have known. There's a lot of validation like that goes a long way for recovery. And there is help. There is support. And yeah, it's a journey. It's a process, but there is goodness on the other side.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings, especially for your mercy in our lives. You're the one that we really need. You're the one that we really long for. And it's your mercy and grace that gives us hope in our lives, Lord. And I just pray for your blessing on our podcast, and that we will reach the people that need to hear. And I just pray that it would bring them some relief from the troubles and the worries that they're having, the struggles that they're having, the feelings that no one would believe them, or there's something wrong with them. I just pray that it would bring them relief, and that they would feel heard, and that it would give them a chance to tell their stories and get that freedom, Lord. And I just pray for your peace in their lives, Lord, that you love them no matter what, and you cherish them, and that they matter to you, Lord. And I just pray that they would feel that in their lives. In your name I pray.
Father, I thank you for the platform to be able to talk about this. And it's hard. It's a hard conversation. And I just pray that something that just really came up for me this week, Lord, is how sometimes all the time, as people who are survivors, we hear platitudes. We hear people say things like, it was meant to be, or, everything happens for a reason. And Lord, those things just, put me in a tailspin. So when people are hearing that, Lord, help them to know that that is not your truth. Your truth is that all things work together for those who love you, Lord, that you didn't plan this. You didn't want this. This wasn't in your design for children to be hurt, Lord. And I just pray that you will help people find the freedom, find the safe people to talk to, Lord, and that they could begin their journey of healing, Lord. And as Daniel said, that we could be kind to ourselves, loving to ourselves, and get the help we need, and know that there are good things ahead. And again, that it wasn't our fault, Lord, but that we can have a life after all of this. In your Son's name. Amen.
Amen.